Agree to. I call the member for Deakin.
Thanks very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I also rise today to place on record my respects on the death of the Right Honourable Malcolm Fraser, and I want to associate myself with the comments very eloquently put by the member for Bass. Before I reflect on some of the areas of achievement that I think Malcolm Fraser should be best known for, I want to offer my condolences to his family. I think in these situations, Malcolm Fraser's role as a husband and father, grandfather or friend is in many respects more important than reflecting on the great things he did in his life, notwithstanding how important they are. So I do offer my condolences to his family first and foremost. There's no doubt that Malcolm Fraser was a great man. You do not become the Prime Minister of Australia unless you have attributes that many of us could just wish for. Malcolm Fraser's determination to do what was right for his country, notwithstanding the personal animosity and quite disgusting treatment that he received, must be admired, because he was the man who took a lot of very, very rough treatment, and he was doing it for the sake of our country. And that's why I think it's always worthwhile reflecting on really his single greatest political achievement, and that was ultimately rescuing Australia from, at the time, the worst government we had ever seen. Let's not forget the profligacy of the Whitlam government, the borderline corruption following the Khemlani affair, and a whole host of other issues. Malcolm Fraser saved Australia from that chaos and division, and for 8 years as Prime Minister, our 22nd Prime Minister, he was able to unite Australians. And again, the treatment that he received, I think most people would not be able to withstand. But the fact that he did so, I think indicates the love he had for his country. And that is what I will remember him most for, the love of Australia and the love of making sure that we remained the greatest country on earth. It's clear that he articulated Australia's feelings with the Turn on the Lights campaign in '75. He went on to win the greatest political victory at a federal level ever. So I think we perhaps over the years have diminished how important and successful he was as a Prime Minister. He was extraordinarily successful in 3 election wins, seeing off a very, very flawed but potent political foe in Gough Whitlam is something that I think all Liberals admire, and I think Australians should be very thankful. Another area of his legacy that I want to touch on was his staunch anti-communism. Again, many people in my cohort, in my age group, perhaps don't appreciate the insidious impact that communism may have had on this country. Were it not for people like Malcolm Fraser and his good friend B.A. Santamaria and others, who valiantly fought against people whose allegiances were more with the Soviet Union than they were with Australia. And many of those were in the upper echelons of the Labor Party. So again, Malcolm Fraser saving us from, with help from many people, but being a key person to save us from that insidious movement is something that all Australians now derive benefits from, even though most of us don't know it. Most of us don't appreciate how tough it was, and the inevitable victory that we had over communism wasn't inevitable at the time. Nobody thought it was inevitable. It was because of people like Malcolm Fraser that we were able to win that war, and we have the country we've got now. Another area of recognition that I want to highlight is his obvious compassion towards Vietnamese refugees fleeing persecution after the fall of Saigon to the North Vietnamese communists. Lots of people in the condolence motion have spoken about his extraordinary generosity and bringing the Australian public with him to help the over 50,000 Vietnamese refugees. But again, we accept multiculturalism now, and I'm a beneficiary of multiculturalism, having a father who was born overseas. We take it for granted that we cherish our society and our multicultural background, but it wasn't the case for Vietnamese refugees until Malcolm Fraser came along. Again, the former government had quite a callous disregard for Vietnamese refugees and were more interested in being in support of a communist regime in North Vietnam than looking after Vietnamese refugees who had worked with Australian forces and worked with Australian diplomats. But Malcolm Fraser changed all that. He dispensed with the callous approach of the Whitlam government with respect to South Vietnamese refugees, and he opened up Australia. And obviously the over 50,000 Vietnamese refugees and now many hundreds of thousands of their progeny who are living in Australia and striving successfully, no doubt appreciate that John Malcolm Fraser is the man with singularly should take the most credit with respect to that. I also want to just highlight that Malcolm Fraser was rightly proud of the government that he led. You're not going to hear from me today any apologies for the often cited criticism of Malcolm Fraser's government over 8 years, that it was a do-nothing government. Nothing could be further from the truth. As has been highlighted earlier in this debate, in 3 short years the Whitlam government took expenditures in today's terms from $65 billion to $105 billion. Profligacy that no government in this country has ever sought to impose on the country. And the fact that Malcolm Fraser was able to arrest that trend, was able to bring back fiscal responsibility, is a task that we should not again diminish 30 or 40 years later. I understand that it would have been extraordinarily difficult to have done that, particularly in a time when the Australian polity was so divided and the Australian community for a time was quite divided. But his shorthand, his steadfastness, his commitment to Australia and his ability to bear the burden of responsibility and to accept the treatment that he received and still plough ahead was something that all of us must be thankful for. So I agree that ultimately, when he conceded defeat in his often quoted words that Australia was in a better condition when he handed it over than when he received it, is the most important thing that I think we can remember. So again, I'd like to pass on my deepest condolences to Malcolm Fraser's family, and I want to reaffirm that there's no doubt he was a great man and a great Liberal Prime Minister.
Thank you very much.